Former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India now joins us. Mr. Khan, thank you so much for joining us on Bloomberg Wind. Firstly, it's a scam or a fraud of an enormous magnitude. What have you made of this, and what do you think are the ramifications now that this has come to light?
As I was telling to some other channel, this is an issue of risk management, people management in banks. And as we understand that SWIFT system was not integrated with CBS, and possibly, I don't know the full detail, the people at the back office probably could not have looked at very carefully. Third is the whole idea of maker-checker concept in issuing SWIFT messages and reconciling them possibly was not foolproof. So they all contributed to this. So that's why there is a need to look at our systems and controls very, very closely. So this is the part. And so, but the ramification is concerned, I am not so much, of course the amount looks quite staggering, but one also has to keep in mind what could be the implication for the standing and credibility of Indian banks in overseas centers in terms of acceptability of our letters of credit and guarantees. You know, this buyer's credit business in the past, some of the overseas regulators have asked Indian banks, how safe are these buyer's credit? And we have taken a stand that it is a safe and sound business, there are no issues. Now that such things come, then that puts doubt about the credibility of the Indian banking system. It may not so happen that tomorrow some centers, our LCs are not accepted, guarantees are not accepted, and the whole buyer's credit business also gets affected. I think that implication we have to keep in mind. That is something. That's why both government, regulators and banks, they have to put their heads together and come out with some statement of intent that this has happened, we are cleaning up, then there is nothing serious to happen, and we are fixing the things. I think that sort of an assurance is very important. Of course, investigation, enforcement action has to follow, given what has happened.
Right. Mr. Khan, this is Vishwanath Nair joining in. You know, what happens, and this is something that the sources are telling us at this point, is that there is no RBI guideline which clearly states that the CBS and the SWIFT network need to talk to each other and that there has to be this reconciling of transactions. Firstly, is that true? And secondly, are banks then free to do this, to have systems that do not talk to each other?
I don't know which guideline you have been talked about, but RBI cannot go and tell every little detail about your systems and controls. If SWIFT messages are being sent and some people is authorized to send some message, should you not put a control system in place that the maker-checker system is there and it is captured and back office sees what are the transactions are happening and it is accounted for. It's a common sense approach, and it has to control has to be put. There cannot be guideline for everything banks put into transaction. The transaction monitoring has to be a major part of our control system, and you have to use some analytics to see the pattern. If there are unusual pattern of large debit, large credits are happening, there has to be something. What are these credits? What are the debits? So the focus has been that any outstanding is there in nostro. But if large credits come, then large debit goes. Somebody has to see why this is happening.
Okay. Sir, PNB in a letter, in a caution notice to other banks also points out that the LOU for import has been kept open for a year when RBI clearly stipulates that it has to be, it's only for a 90-day period. Was there a clear violation of norms on that aspect at least?
No, the one has to see whether this 90 days is for the gems and jewelry and diamonds and all. So whether it is only for gems and jewelry or there are some other imports have happened where these 90 days don't apply. So one has to see. The second part is whether the overseas branches should have seen that this LOI has been issued, assuming that they have been issued in contravention of RBI guidelines, whether they have been issued and whether they have relied on the issuing bank. So whose responsibility? I think that has to be legally examined. So it is not a cut and dry case that you can say that this party is 100% responsible. So we have to see the fact and see that liability, what could be the apportioning of liability. You can't just come to an immediate conclusion that
Mr. Khan, there's also this this whole argument of who's exactly liable here, whether it's the Punjab National Bank or banks that did not do their due diligence whenever approving these contracts. So the debate there essentially is that Punjab National Bank says you violated some of these norms, some of these requirements, while the banks say that a SWIFT message is essentially a contract. What would you say here? Because
no, as I said, it has to be very legally examined. One is bank gives a guarantee, so that guarantee is bank has to stand by that guarantee. But then there are if there are frauds, courts have gone in a different direction and say there are frauds and collusion between the issuing bank and overseas bank, and overseas bank has been apparently negligent. There are some issues, finer aspects of regulation and legal setup, so that has to be examined. But prima facie, of course, the responsibility lies the fellow who has issued the guarantee. But then, as I mentioned, we have to see the finer aspects, whether there is some collusion overseas. And so now, the whole idea is this buyer's credit was going on this basis that it's a safe and sound business. So that has come into question. So my worry is in future, what is going to happen to this buyer's credit business? Yeah. Where you get funds from overseas based on the understanding that this is a very safe and sound business. Okay. That is being put to question.
Mr. Khan, I have one more question, and as we speak, the bank Nifty is actually sort of taking it on the chin, and you are seeing the Nifty sort of slide down as well. This is not good news for most of the banking stocks. Mr. Khan, the question is, not so long ago we did see a fairly serious interbank reconciliation scam play out before us. And now we are seeing, another kind of fraud being committed right in one of the fairly large public sector banks. Where does this leave the Reserve Bank of India and the kind of checks and balances it has put in place? Is there a clear lacuna in what the RBI is doing, or at least in terms of the norms that the banks are supposed to follow? Where do you think is the lacuna?
I think elaborate directions and instructions have been issued in terms of fraud monitoring. There is one central fraud registry. Banks have access to that to know modus operandi what happens. Then there is an alert system, red flag system. Then there is a provision for special committee of the board which should look at the frauds and whether the systemic lacunas are there. So the process and procedure are laid down. But sometimes you only believe in ticking the boxes. Going beyond that is very, very important. I think time has come. We have to holistically look at the entire risk management framework, operation risk management framework of banks, because more and more we move towards IT dependency systems. So these control aspects in a holistic manner has to be examined. So one can say that public sector banks may be a little behind, but I will not be surprised there are gaps in many non-public sector banks also. I think there is a need on a war footing, looking at the risk management and control system from the operation risk management point of view in all banks.
Sure.
I think banks themselves, IBA, RBI, and government may have to take very proactive steps.
Sir, I don't want to sound alarmist, but the headline number seems extremely large. What is the fallout? Is there a systemic risk here?
No, as I told you, one is that banks are struggling with NPAs and they have to provide for that, and the new guidelines which has come probably will accelerate the provisioning requirements. There are issues from the treasury point of view, treasury profit loss point of view, being the yields hardening, so there are issues. And over and above that, we have this sort of loss arising out of fraudulent transactions. So it is triple whammy for the banks. But then things have happened, we have to rectify and move ahead. So the whole idea is to draw lessons and set right things. It's not that we just get stuck with this thing and we can't raise our hand. We have to move ahead. But as I mentioned, I think there is a serious case to look at the operation risk management system in banks.
Mr. Khan, we leave it there. Thank you so much indeed for joining us with your views. That's the former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India talking about a need to review the risk management systems and clear lacuna in norms as far as fraud detection is concerned.